Welcome, listeners. I am super excited to have a new friend that I am going to get to know while my listeners do. I'm going to take notes. I know I'm going to be a better mediator because of it, but I have the lovely Laila Aitken Ali. Did I say that right?
Yes, you
Okay, I
did.
had to ask. We were joking about how my kids always make fun of how I don't pronounce things correctly. But Laila is so kind to be here with us today. She is, I think you're known as a divorce doula. You're a divorce coach. You founded Split, FYI. And
Mhm.
if my listeners are on Instagram or Facebook, I know that they have seen you. You have the greatest little videos. I try
Thank
to
you.
copy your style a little bit sometimes because it's so good and so helpful. So, listeners, today, really what we're going to talk about a lot is clarity, kind of clarity through divorce. And my listeners know how much I love learning about mindset. And Laila, I am a life coach. I don't really coach, I'm a divorce attorney turned mediator, but I feel like the coaching piece has helped me become better. So I am totally into all the stuff you're going to be sharing with us today. So, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me. And I love that I'm kicking off the new year having a conversation with you and gaining a new friend. So I love that,
I
honestly.
agree. I agree totally. Well, Lila, what I usually like to do is just let my listeners get to know my guest a little by hearing the story. I mean, there's usually something that led someone to do the hard work that you're doing. So, what led you to do this work?
Well, it was my own experience with divorce. And I think that you probably hear that a lot and often in the world of coaching and mediating and so forth, that um, it, it resonates with you, right? When you go through something yourself, and you go through it for a long time. I was in and out of court for about 10 years.
Whew.
Yes, and I was sideswiped by divorce when I was pregnant.
Oh,
So it was a long journey through, figuring out how to be a mom and simultaneously going through a divorce. And what I saw was there were these gaps in the world of divorce of, through knowledge and community, because especially when you're younger and you're going through it,
mhm.
right? You tend to be going through it when everyone's getting married and having kids. And there's this feeling of isolation. And you start breaking down, like, well, actually, you lose trust in self, right? So I lost so much trust in my ability to really navigate anything.
Yeah.
Okay. My judgment and who I am. I mean, you start beating yourself up when something like this happens because you feel like a failure. You feel all these feels that I know a lot of people who are going through divorce will feel one or the other or all of them combined, but there is that similarity, right?
Yeah.
Because it is an end of something that you never really set out to end, right?
Right.
So I would say that that was a big catalyst. And when I was going through it, I was that first person in my peer group to be going through something like that. Now, fast forward maybe a couple of years, 3 or 4 years in, it turned out to be that everybody was coming to me, right? Oh, I have a friend, or I'm going through a divorce. Can you help me? Or, a family member is going through it. So I became this mentor.
Mhm.
This is before I even knew like divorce coaching was a thing. I was living in London, UK at the time. And during that time, I actually became a mediator. And I became a
Oh,
mediator because I needed help for myself to navigate the communication, understand what I wanted, right? And how do I communicate that instead of having my lawyer deal with everything, right? I became one of those that was like, I can't deal with it. Bury the head in the sand. I don't want to deal with any of this stuff, and I was just overwhelmed with emotion as well. And we know that we don't make great decisions when we're in an emotional state. So I became that mediator to get actually confidence, gain that confidence and figure
mhm.
out, all right, how can I help myself through all of this rather than just abdicating all my decision making to some third party or somebody else, right? And what I was up against somebody who wanted to clearly fight me. hence going in and out of court for a long time.
Yeah.
So, and nobody can help you through that except yourself, and so to speak, right? There are people who can support you, and there's family and there's friends, and all that support is super important. But at the end of the day, you're the only person who can make those decisions and kind of
Yeah.
help yourself through all of that, right? So that was the catalyst to kind of, after mentoring, I realized, oh, I'm better at this, actually. I really enjoy this. And then when I moved here back to America 5 years ago from London, I became a certified divorce coach. And I was like, you know what? I am going to hone in on my process and understand that process and help people through. Now, listen, everybody's in different stages, right? And there is a no linear process in all of this, but there is certain things that steps that you can take to kind of mitigate the overwhelm. And part of the conversation is that for me was like, I want to be that person that I wish I had when I was going through a divorce.
Yeah.
That's it.
That is the best place to be. I mean, don't you hear it all the time on these podcasts that I listen to? Ed Milet always says that, help the person who is where you were. And that is what you're doing. And I
Absolutely.
love that. And as there's so many things I love about what you just said, but I'm so curious, and I'm sure my listeners are too. So what are the steps? And, Laila, this can help you in any stage of divorce or in anything you're going through in life, if you're just
Absolutely.
feeling overwhelmed. So you talk about the steps and you say they may not be linear. And so you took what you did to help yourself, and now you've kind of got it for other people to utilize, correct?
Yes, and also, like, just by virtue of mentoring and coaching people, that I realize that there's similarities, even though the stories are wholly different. I mean,
Yeah.
but there are these nuances that are all quite similar, of that feeling of fear, overwhelm,
Yep.
the unknown, right? Like nobody likes the unknown. No matter what position you are and where you are in life, nobody likes to not know what's going to happen,
Right.
right? And so it's kind of moving away from the fact of you're not going to know, because nobody ever knows what's going to happen. Things can change, in 1 second. Everywhere you walk out the door, things could be different, right? Like, it's kind of moving away from that and going into, I like to call it, compartmentalizing your life. I know it sounds a little bit like, okay, whatever, but I was like, put it in buckets, right? We tend to do that when we're working, or we're working on a project, or we're working with our kids. It's like, okay, our kids need to, we got to find the right school. We've got to do this. We put things in a kind of a bucket of how we approach things. Why not do that with this scenario? Right? It's like, don't look at everything all at once. That's number one. That's like step one. It's like, if you start thinking about, let's say you have kids, right?
Yep.
And you start thinking about, how are the kids going to react? How am I going to deal with the kids? And then how am I going to the finances? How am I going to get my head around all of this? And then how am I going to start putting the, in motion around the divorce, or communication, or the lawyer, and all of looking at all of this in one thing is super overwhelming. And then what happens? You get stuck. You don't know how to move, in which way, or what direction, right? Because it's anything. It's like, if I look at my to-do list every day, okay, my 100 things on my to-do list, if I look at all that, I'm overwhelmed. Now, if I take 3 things and write it down, and I have 3 things in front of me, I can do it. Here's one thing I know I have to accomplish for personal today. Here's one thing I have to do for my work. And there's one thing here I have to do with my kid. Done.
I love that you're saying that, because that is how I felt before I came, I came into my office today, and it's the kind of the first day I'm really working in the new year, and I did some goal work, and I compartmentalized my goals. So I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
But I love what you said, because I was feeling overwhelmed, and I was like, ugh, I don't like this feeling. This isn't where I want to be. And the same thing when you're going through a divorce, there is so much. So how do people usually compartmentalize it? Like,
Well,
kids,
yeah.
finances, like, okay.
Well, I would say there's the legality of divorce, right?
Yep.
There's I would say the due diligence, the work on it, right? There's the work aspect of divorce. And then there's the emotional bucket. Okay, which is really important, by the way. And then if you have kids, it's the kids, or if it's the finances and you want to separate that, then it's the finance. So with legal, there's the kids and the finance are also in there,
Yeah.
right? But let's separate and not look at it all holistic, like all at once. Work on certain things and aspects at a time, but also constantly check in with self and be working on that, right? And you don't gain clarity, and this goes back to what we're really talking about in this, is that you don't gain clarity if you're looking at everything all at once. There's no like, just one thing goes into another because the fear starts coming in, especially with finances and then kids. And you're like, oh my God, how am I going to afford this? How am I going to do that? And how is it? Oh, like it's all over the place. And you have to allow yourself to gain the knowledge because you're acting from a place of fear, not the known, right? It's not the known, it's the unknown. You're creating a story around all of these things, right? Without knowing really where you stand.
So, and my guess is going to be just like when you're communicating and the emotions get high, or with myself, I'm not using my best part of my brain when I'm frantic. And so, and I did try to do this. I tried to listen to the birds. There aren't many out in Wisconsin these days, but I
I
was
love it.
listening just to try to switch my focus or to take a deep breath to maybe get you into the state, because I bet it can be hard to compartmentalize because, you feel like, well, yeah, I mean, I can look at three things, but I've got a lot. But if you can keep practicing that, I
Right.
bet it gets easier.
So I use a technique, and I've shared this a lot, and maybe, people have heard this if you see me on Instagram, but I use a technique that when I start going into all that spiral of so many things and thoughts, I go like this, I snap my fingers and say, back in the room.
Ooh, I
And
like that.
I'm like, back in the room. And why the snapping and the action of saying and doing an action really helps your mind and body align with that. And it's like, whoa, it's like you're snapping yourself into the present moment and not going into the keeping
Ooh.
the spiral going, the overwhelm, the, oh my God, because at the end of the day, what does that do for us? Nothing,
No.
right? Like you're not in action mode. The key here is to get into action mode, right? And just to get clear and to get into action mode. And the only way to get into action mode is to be present and be like, okay, what can I work with absolutely now? That's it. None of the should I, would I, what if this happens, the what ifs, the buts, all of that stuff, right? Like it's the now. Like what can I work with in this moment and get that clarity?
I love that. I love that clarity piece. And I love the fact that kind of the first thing is to notice that you've got the mind monkeys going or whatever. Like, and sometimes it's hard to even be aware that but that's maybe if you're brand new to this, that might be the first thing to just realize, oh, I'm spinning out right now. Then do something, snap your fingers. I love that. Get back in the room, get back in the present moment. And then you're going to be able to have the clarity to set up these compartments of what you can work on. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, and I make a practice because I'm just going to take there's a list to do's in divorce. Okay. That's like clear, right? But, and everything feels important, but really in the end of the day, it's like, if you have that discipline of you just say three things, that's it. Even one, I mean, whatever. If you accomplish one, then you feel good about yourself. Be in a place where you're trying to put yourself in a positive situation, not in a negative, then you beat yourself up. You're like, I can't get this done. I can't do this. And it's very hard to make yourself want to do the things. I mean, it's like, I always say this, like doing the taxes. Who likes doing taxes? No one.
No.
It's the same. It's like times 10 doing the work for divorce, right? Because there's such an emotional charge in all of it. Right? So recognize that. And if you're feeling emotional, you have that charge inside of you, then that's your number one thing to do, is to figure out, how can I be good to myself, do some self-care stuff, and make myself feel better, so that I'm in a mindset for me to actually do the thing that I don't really want to do.
Okay. Give us some tips on how to get into that better if you can. And I'm just thinking too, I wanted to add, I love what you're saying about changing your mindset to more positive. And this is one thing, since we're in the new year, one
Mhm.
thing that I'm really working on doing. I don't know if you've read the book, The Gap and the Gain, but
No.
it's really good. And it's about, I think it's Benjamin Hardy. He wrote it with someone, Dan Sullivan. And you look back on your day and you pick 3 gains you made. You
Mhm.
don't even look at anything that went batty. You just look at, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes if you're not in a good place, but you can always find something that you gained or some way that you grew. So I love that you're saying that. That helps me get in a better mindset when I lay down to go to sleep. But okay, so what other, and that's, what other things can people do to take care of themselves and to get in that mindset?
Well, I think that there's a certain degree of we beat ourselves up when we're going through something like this, right?
Mhm.
And in so many ways, we feel like we're not good enough as a parent. We're not good enough as a person. We made so many mistakes, the shoulda, woulda, couldas. I mean, God, how many of them, right? And there's so many of these things that don't serve us. It's recognizing that. It's like, well, how are you talking to yourself? What are the things that you're saying to yourself? And can you start saying something that's better? Like, how would you talk to your friend? We all say this. Like,
Yeah.
would you talk to your friend or your family or your kid? I mean, even just take your child. Like, would you talk to your child that way? No.
Right.
Right. So that it goes down to, and we hear this a lot, it's like, well, you've got an inner child too. You've got an inner self that needs to be nurtured, that needs to be spoken to in a kind way. So why wouldn't you do that? So it's the number one thing is like, what are the things that you can say to yourself that you believe in, right? What
Yeah.
for? And I always say it's like when you have self-doubt, start thinking about the things that you've actually done and accomplished. There's always one. If you're a mom or a dad, you've had a kid and whatever it is that you've done, you're
Yeah.
like, come on. I mean, just by virtue of having that and they're still ticking and they're still alive and they're well, like, wow, that's already one thing that you can automatically put on there, right?
Yeah.
I was speaking to a client the other day and she's like, she's got 4 kids and, she's beating herself up about the things that she hasn't done. And this, I was like, wait. You've got 4 kids, all post-teenagerhood, all right, who are all thriving and they're great. That in itself, you have to even give and commend yourself for, right? Like put that on that list and remind yourself, like if you can raise 4 kids, you can do anything, right? So it's recognizing that we take for granted some of the things that we do,
Yep.
and we're not giving ourselves those accolades because we're not designed to. And it's
Right.
starting to get into a mindset where actually I need to start acknowledging the things that I do and the
Mhm.
things that I have accomplished and the feelings that I do have, right? That are valid. So that leads into another thing that I always say is focus on how you want to feel. Okay. We don't do that enough. So
Yeah.
we want to focus on an outcome or tangible, something that we can, feel, see, and recognize. Whereas the feeling is the most important thing. To me, it's like, how do you want to feel?
Yeah.
And some people don't even know how to answer that. They're like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm like, well, that's where you start. Because if you start embodying that feeling, okay, about yourself, about life, about whatever it is, that you start getting into this kind of flow state around that. And then things start to happen because you're based on that feeling. It's like, you want to feel free. You want to feel in control. You want to
Mhm.
feel this. Like all these things, these are feelings that really have to be recognized. So that helps with that you know, I don't know, self-help piece, basically.
I love what you're saying. And there's another book by that author, Benjamin Hardy, about be your future self now. And it's the same thing. And I've talked about this on the podcast, Lila. It's exactly what you're saying. So, what the things that I'm kind of practicing now is I see my future self and I'm focusing more on what I feel like. So, if I look at like my health,
Mhm.
I don't think about what I weigh, and I don't even necessarily think about what I look like.
Mhm.
I think about how I feel, and I feel strong and healthy, and my body can move. What a different experience than trying to like white knuckle it
Yeah.
and reach a goal. So I feel like that's kind of the same thing that you're saying, is if you can think about how you want to feel and maybe even daydream about what that feels like, you kind of get there.
Absolutely. It's like you have felt it before, right? We don't go for the unattainable feeling, by the way, ever, because we are humans and we have touched every feeling on that wheel of emotion, okay, and feeling. So exactly, I've got that.
I just held up my feelings wheel for
I mean, 100%, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
and so you know those feelings. They're in you, right? So
Mhm.
we got to extrapolate them. We got to get them up to the forefront. We're like, I was saying the other day, I was like, I was having some self-doubt and, I'm like, God, I really get in my way sometimes. And I think to myself, I was like, I remember that feeling of literally like there's nothing in my way, that feeling that I was like, I can do this. I don't even care if I don't do this, because
Mhm.
the thought of failure wasn't even inside my brain.
Yeah.
And I was really charged with that. And I was a walk-on lacrosse, like NCAA Division I player, right? And got a scholarship for it. So, and I
Wow.
sat there and I was like, didn't even doubt myself. And that feeling of not doubting and that feeling of secureness, I was like, I'm going to tap into that. And that
Mhm.
was college days, right? So, back in the days.
Yeah, good girl though. Yeah.
I had to tap in because I'm like, I've been here before. I know I've been there. Why can't I not do it again? Like, where our
Right.
body keeps the score, we know that we can do this again. Our mind knows we can do this again. So it is a bit of, you got to talk to yourself a little bit,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know?
And
And you got to remind yourself like who you are and what you've done and what you've accomplished is really important. And to a certain degree, you're going to be a different person anyway. Going through a divorce does make you a different person. You're still got qualities and things of the past, but it's like you are never going to go back to that person that you were in that relationship. Absolutely not. You know better, you know more, you're coming out of something, you're changing your life,
yeah.
you're facing some circumstances. I know I have clients who are 30 years in marriage. They're like, that's what I knew. That's all I knew for so
Yeah.
long. Forgot even who I was. So a
Mhm.
certain degree, it's like tapping into that, right? Again.
And
Is-
using it, that I always like to talk about using it. And sometimes it's hard to see it as an opportunity when
Yeah.
you're in the, I mean, I know I'm saying this and some people are probably like, what? Shut
Yeah.
up. But when you get to the other side, if you can do the work to suffer less right now and get through it, you're going to gain those skills for the future.
Absolutely. I mean, another client of mine has, this is amazing. She's like, I never lived on my own. I went from having roommates to my husband,
Yeah.
living for my family to roommates to husband. I've never lived on my own. This is the first time I'm living on my own. And I really was fearful of it. And I've embraced it. And now I'm loving it. And it's like, even that, recognizing that. I mean, she's got fear of other things because she's still going through the divorce, but it was like, oh my goodness, I can do this. I never thought I could do this. Right.
Well, and I
And
think she was working with you, Lila, because that she was doing the thing. So that's so amazing. And I am looking at the time and I feel like this went like way too fast, but
I
we're already
know.
getting to like the where I rein it in and get a piece of advice, a key takeaway, something that the listeners could do right now to make their lives better.
Well, okay, so one of my favorite quotes is by Rumi that says, "Life is a balance between holding on and letting go." Okay?
Mm,
So, finding that balance. Okay, what can you let go? What's the stories that you tell yourself that you can let go? What are the things and actions that you've done that you can let go? What are the people and, circumstances or that construct of the life that you lived, what are the things you can let go of, right? And then what can you hold on to? What is that inside of you and that piece that we were talking about? Like, what is inside of you that that you're good at? Like, find those things and figure those things out, right? It's like
mhm.
this is the journey of self-discovery and clarity. And I
Yeah.
think that all helps you get super clear on the things that you want. And I mean, part of the process, I would say, moving into that second piece is make lists. We all make lists, but it's really important to make lists of like, not only how you want to feel, but it's like, what do you want? What
Yeah.
do you want to create for yourself? you know? And I know it's hard for people who are still holding on to that relationship and are really hurting and healing. And I get that, you know, certain things you're not ready for, and don't beat yourself up. You don't have to do
Right.
it, right? Know where you're at in the process. Start with self. And then you can start with the clarity of what you really want, the outcome, what you would like to create for yourself. You know, those are really important lists to make, and they always can change and chop and change, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
I will say this, and I've said this so many times that I think I have to make a love book. One of the things I make all my clients do is get a book, and it's like a journal. I'll show you mine. It's this like journal with empty pages,
Yeah.
and I call it the love book. And what I do with this love book is that every time somebody gives me a compliment or says something kind to me, it goes into this love book, whether they've written it to me, whether it's on a card, whether they say it in passing, whether it's a stranger, whether it's somebody I know, it all goes into this. Because we are so good at remembering all the bad, shitty things that people say to us.
Yes.
Okay. But we do not remember the good things. And when you're going through something like this and you're reading those lawyer letters, or you're getting whatever from your ex, or even, so to speak, people around you or family members, sometimes people can be really hard. It's really, really important to remember that there actually is that counterpart. There are people who see you and recognize you and appreciate you, and take that on. Don't let it bounce off of you.
I
So,
love that, because don't we just let things like that bounce off and then we hold on? Oh, I'm
absolutely.
going to start doing that. I love that piece of advice. So, Laila, I know you're on Instagram, you're
Yes.
on social media. We'll have your information in the show notes. How can
Amazing.
people find you if they want to work with you?
That's the best way, I think, through Instagram. I'm the Split Coach on Instagram, and Split, FYI, is a tech company that I run, which actually supports people through divorce and separation with loads of resources and community. So
Yeah.
access to community and meetups that we have virtually, that we can also work with people while they're working on their divorce. So there's accountability hour, there is group meetings. So it's great. So either
Yep.
way.
And yeah, it's great to be in community too if you're needing that through this. It's what you needed, and now you're giving it to others. So
Exactly.
I am so grateful. I'm so thankful I got to meet you. And yeah, started my new year. You are my first podcast recording of the new year. So such a treat. Laila, thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome. Thank you.
I have a new friend and I learned a lot. You're going to make me a better mediator.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
love that. I appreciate you. That's going in my love book.
Good. Yeah, I was going to try to give you some things for that. So awesome. Thanks,
Oh, yeah.
Laila.
Thank you.
Take good care.